Yeah, I think this may not be a very popular opinion, but I truly believe that in order to make kidney nutrition more culturally inclusive, we want to have more conversations with the patients instead of just giving them a handout. I put in the recommendations in my note as we're talking, and after our consultation, they will be able to review my notes and they would know my personalized recommendations instead of just looking at a handout that doesn't even make a lot of sense to them.
Hey everyone, welcome to Food Culture Curious, the podcast where we dive into the intersection of culture and nutrition. I'm your host, Arely Gutierrez, a Latina registered dietitian, and I'm here to explore how cultural inclusivity can transform our approach to food, health, and well-being. Each episode aims to empower you to better understand and serve diverse communities with practical insights, personal stories, and expert advice. If you find this podcast valuable, don't forget to hit that follow button, leave us a review, and share it on your socials. You can find us as at Food Culture Curious. Hey everyone, welcome to Food Culture Curious. My name is Arely. I'm a registered dietitian on a mission to promote cultural inclusion and nutrition in healthcare. Today we have with us Jing Xie. She's an online renal dietitian and she helps people with CKD stages 1 through 5 improve their labs and symptoms, delay or prevent future need on dialysis through personalized nutrition and a sustainable lifestyle. Jing is originally from China and she moved to the US in 2012 to study dietetics. She has been a dietitian for over 7 years now and has helped over 500 clients with CKD across cultures. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you for inviting me.
Of course. You are living my dream. You get to help out the CKD population, help them not get to dialysis or at least delay dialysis, which is amazing. So thank
Yeah,
you for being on here. And we want to learn all about you, your cultural foods, how you help your populations, everything.
thank you. Thank you for the introduction. We need more dietitians from different cultural backgrounds to best support our patient populations with CKD.
Yes, absolutely. So tell us a little bit about your food cultures. What influences them? And tell us a little bit about the foods that you grew up with.
Yeah, of course. So I am Cantonese and I'm originally from Guangzhou, which is the southern part of China. So in my culture, we eat a lot of rice and noodle dishes. We also do a lot of steamed dishes, dim sum, and soups. So I was in boarding schools all my life, just from elementary school, middle school, up to high school. And I would spend the weekdays mostly in school and head back to my grandparents' house on Friday for dinner and stay with my parents on the weekends. And my grandparents will always make these soups incorporating meats, beans, and vegetables. And it was such a pleasant memory of my childhood. And I think that's a big part of my culture.
Oh, that's awesome. Perfect. Tell us a little bit about what were some really prominent proteins that you said you saw?
Yeah, so we do in the Cantonese culture, we eat a lot of chicken and fish, and we also do tofu and a lot of soy-based protein. So with chicken, we like to do very fresh, like poached chicken to just have the natural flavor from chicken. And we don't like to add a lot of condiments to our meat or chicken or fish dishes, just to enjoy the ingredient, enjoy the food sources themselves.
Oh, awesome. And then I know you mentioned for the starches, you talked about like noodles, rice. Can you tell us a little bit more about the produce that you grew up with?
Yeah, we honestly we ate a very big variety of produce, a lot of tropical fruits. We do a lot of lychee, bananas, oranges. We also do a lot of like pineapple. Some of the fruits I don't even know the names in English, but we do a lot of different fruits in our culture.
Yeah, I noticed that happens sometimes, especially when you
Yeah.
speak another language. Like sometimes I only know what it's called in Spanish. I don't even know
Yeah.
what it's
Because
called in
some of the
English.
fruits, yeah, some of the fruits that we eat there, they don't even I don't even see them here in the US.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What are some very popular dishes from that region?
Yeah, so some of the like the poached chicken, like that's a very popular dish. That's very specific to my culture, like the Cantonese culture. And there are also very popular dishes like dim sum. Like sometimes like on Saturday morning, the whole family would just go to a dim sum restaurant and we will have a pot of tea with different little dishes like steamed buns, stir fry dishes, rice noodles. We will also do those saute like white noodles with beef, also like steamed vegetables. So just like a lot of different dishes, and we'll just share them as a whole family.
So, for the listeners that aren't familiar, what exactly is dim sum? And talk a little bit about that family style serving.
Yeah, so I don't even know if there's like a accurate description for dim sum, like in like simple terms. But dim
Mhm.
sum basically represents Cantonese style brunch, I would say, and you will always pair the food with a pot of tea.
Mm.
And basically, the dishes vary from steam dishes to stir fried dishes to clay pot dishes to sauté dishes, and even like soups, dumpling, wonton soups. So a lot of different things in that dim sum criteria. The key part is to you want to pair the brunch with always with tea.
I always wondered that because I've been to a couple of dim sum restaurants, and my general experience was that you get a lot of choices, and then
Yes.
they bring all the dishes, and then they have that family style, maybe a lazy Susan, where everyone just gets a little bit of everything.
Yes. Yeah. That's the idea. Everybody gets a little bit of everything, and you would sit there for the whole morning to early afternoon and just chat and eat and order more tea. Yeah.
That sounds nice. So, tell us a little bit about your holidays growing up. What are a couple that you celebrated, and what were some popular foods during these holidays?
Yeah, for me, honestly, like I grew up with my parents and also like grandparents. And my grandmother is from Beijing, which is the northern part of China, and the rest of my family is from Guangzhou. So we're like the rest of us are Cantonese. So I grew up eating like different types of holiday foods, like China. So in the new year, like we would do a lot of dumplings, which is prominent in like the northern part of the Chinese culture in the new year. So we make dumplings, and sometimes we will also like deep fry like a sweet, it's like a sweet dumpling. So you wrap it, you use flour to make the wraps, and then you put like peanuts, sesame, and sugar and shredded coconuts as filling, and you wrap it like a dumpling, and then you deep fry it. So that's that kind of food is pertinent to the southern part, like the Cantonese culture. So we eat like different kinds of food. We eat the like the northern kind of food and then the southern kind of food, like in Chinese New Year celebration.
Yeah, that's something I like to ask about because I don't think people realize just how many regional differences there are.
Yeah, there are a lot of regional differences, and Chinese New Year is very big in China, and a lot of people don't realize different regions celebrate the holiday with different foods.
Yeah,
And I grew up with two cultures just because my grandma is from Beijing, so that's why we grew up eating different foods.
yeah. Thank you for sharing with us. So, is there anything from your memories growing up that gives you a lot of nostalgia as far as foods, like any foods that you see that take you back?
Yeah, so the soups that I mentioned earlier, that makes me really nostalgic just because that always reminds me of my grandparents and how they used to take care of me every Friday afternoon when I went back home from school. So we would cook the soup for 2 hours at
Mhm.
least, just so that the soup is infused with flavors from different types of ingredients. So that's something that's very, it's such a pleasant memory of my childhood. And then also the steamed rice noodles. You will see that here in the US, like in some cities you see that, but not
Mhm.
in every city. Like for example, before I moved to Boston, I was in Wisconsin, Madison for undergrad. And in Madison, there weren't a lot of the Chinese restaurants, and I would never see the steamed rice noodles there. So every time I went back to China to spend my winter breaks or summer breaks, I will always get the steamed rice noodles.
Yeah. It's hard when you live somewhere and they don't have the foods that you're used to. My
Yeah.
husband and I used to live in North Carolina for a bit, and
Oh,
there's not nearly as many Hispanic people as there is here in Houston. We're in Texas, we're so much
yeah.
closer to the border. So I would have to drive like 45 minutes just to find a good taco. And
Oh, wow.
it's yeah, it's difficult.
Yeah. Really depends on where you're at in the
Mhm.
US. Yeah.
Yeah, we're very blessed in Houston that there's a little bit of everything, a very diverse population, so we can find some pretty good foods.
Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you for sharing with us about your food culture, Jing. Can you talk to us a little bit about, so this is a question I like to ask, especially
Yeah.
for any healthcare professionals that are listening.
Yeah.
Any foods that carry a special meaning that's related to health that even, let's say, it may not be evidence-based yet, it's wisdom that's passed down that we relate to certain foods. So, are there any certain foods that you saw growing up or that were used
Mm.
in your family for when someone felt sick or were just health promoting?
Yeah, yeah, that's a very good question. Now I'm thinking about how my mom took care of me when I was like sick. I remember she would, I think I still do that sometimes, like when I like catch a cold or when I just feel under the weather. Like she would used to make this boiled ginger water. So basically you just boil a pot of water and put like fresh ginger root in there
Yeah.
and you would drink it when you have a cold or when you have a bad cough and it's really soothing for the throat. I don't know if there's any therapeutic evidence, but it just felt therapeutic when you were not feeling well. And that's something that I still do from time to time. When I don't feel well or when my husband doesn't feel well, I would cook him like a pot of ginger water and he would feel a lot better after drinking it.
Yeah, that's some awesome wisdom that's passed down. Any others that come to mind, either maybe different stages of life that you can think of?
Yeah, so I think what I'm gonna share is actually already like quite evidence-based, which is making sure you have vegetables at each meal. That's actually a very big part of my culture growing up. So I just remember because I grew up in boarding school, right? And I also spend the weekends like with my parents, like grandparents. But it doesn't matter if I were in school or at home, I would always be served with a large portion of leafy greens. So in my culture, in the Cantonese style, like Cantonese culture, there's a saying that say that if you don't eat leafy greens, it means that you didn't eat vegetables. So we only count greens as toward the vegetable group. So every meal we will always have leafy greens and sometimes including breakfast. And that's such a big part of my culture. And even now, there's always leafy greens in my fridge. Yeah.
Good, that's awesome.
Yeah.
That's really cool. That's a part of the culture is to just have leafy greens, even at breakfast time, all the time.
Even at breakfast time, yeah, even in the dim sum like places, we'll
Mhm.
always order like the steamed Chinese broccoli or the yo choy, and we'll just eat it bland or put some oyster sauce or some soy sauce on top of it.
Awesome. Okay, cool. Something we could all probably do a little bit better of getting more greens.
Yeah. I do notice like after I came to the US though, I'm like my leafy green intake has decreased.
Mm.
Yeah.
The environment is a big influence for sure.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Talking about that, I remember like when I first came to the US back in 2012, like I was only 18. That's another thing about my culture. So growing up, we never ate salads. So
Mm.
we would always eat cooked vegetables, either steam or like saute or stir fry. So going into school in medicine, because it's such a, I don't know if you've ever been to Wisconsin, but there's a lot of cultural diversity there.
Okay.
So if you want vegetables in school, like in the school cafeteria, like you mostly just get the salad.
Mm.
And it was really important for me to eat vegetables at meals to keep myself healthy. But every time I went to a salad bar, like I would have a hard time picking the vegetables, the raw vegetables I could tolerate. So I would only get like the raw cucumbers and the cherry tomatoes every meal. But I think like my tolerance kind of built up over time just because I didn't really have a choice. And now
Mhm.
I eat anything. Like I can tolerate any salads. And sometimes I would make salads at home as well. Like you said, environment can really shape one's habit.
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
exactly. And
Yeah.
I agree with you 100%. To this day, I struggle very much with cold salads. Prefer my vegetables cooked. I just, yeah.
Yeah.
And especially in the Mexican culture, people assume that we don't eat vegetables because we don't really do salads. But the
Right.
thing is, our vegetables are already in the sauce, they're
The thought.
already in the food. We don't really have them separate. So I like my vegetables hot.
Yeah. Yeah. I
Perfect.
honestly, I have definitely accepted more raw vegetables like over the years, over the past 13 years.
That's
Yeah,
good.
it's easier. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for talking to us about your own cultural foods and all the factors that influence that, especially the transition from
Yeah.
how you would eat in China versus coming to the US and how we eat here. I'd
Sure.
like to hear a little bit about your insights as far as CKD. So you're a renal dietitian, you're
Yep.
working with different populations across different cultures. Tell us a little bit about what you do and how you work to help your patients, especially if they're of the Asian population, and even if they're a population you may not be familiar with. How do you approach it?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Like being a online renal dietitian, naturally there are people from different cultures who reach out to me for help. So when I do my consultations with my clients, so during the first session, I always listen to their food preferences first. So just because two of my clients are from, say, like Indonesia, doesn't mean that they have the same cultural preference because everybody's cultural preference is something that means differently to everybody. And my whole approach is help my clients make very small and realistic tweaks based on their original dietary patterns instead of reinventing the wheels. So basically, I wouldn't ask them to change things drastically. I would just help them to make small tweaks that are tailored to their cultural needs and their food preferences.
Wonderful. It sounds like you do a deep dive with them as far as what they're
Yeah.
already eating, and then you just make changes here and there to help them get to their goals. Do you ask for a recall beforehand, or how do you learn a little bit more about their foods if it's something you're not familiar with?
Yeah, I always feel this is always going to be a learning curve for me, like for every client. So as I get to know them more and more, I will get to know their preferences more and more. So during our first call, during our first session together, I will ask them to do like a diet recall and also walk me through their diet on typical day and also do like a 24-hour diet recall. And they will walk me through what they ate the day like before. That way I can understand the varieties in their diet, and if I don't understand something, if I don't understand like a name of a dish that they mentioned to me, I would just ask them to explain it to me, like instead of doing my own research, because everybody's cooking style is also different as
Mhm.
well.
Exactly. It could you could be talking about the exact same dish, but people are going to put
Different.
different things
Yeah,
in it. So
exactly. Exactly. Yeah.
that's a very good point. Awesome. Any more little wisdom that you can share with us? I know prior to starting of this recording, we are talking a little bit about how,
Yeah.
unfortunately, a lot of the information out there, a lot of the handouts out there are of a very Western view of the diet. How do you help with creating handouts that is more culturally appropriate, or how do you just feel about trying to make kidney nutrition more culturally inclusive?
Yeah, I think this may not be a very like popular opinion, but I truly believe that in order to make kidney nutrition like more culturally inclusive, we want to have more conversations with the patients instead of just giving them a handout to expect them to follow it. And that's exactly why when I talk with my clients through my online practice, I type the notes as we talk and I put in the recommendations in my notes as we're talking. And after our consultation, like they will be able to review my notes and they would know my personalized recommendations instead of just looking at a handout that doesn't even make a lot of sense to them. I know that you and I, we have experience working in a dialysis clinic. I served like a lot of Chinese patients when I was at my dialysis job. And I feel like the biggest misconception that I see is that a lot of the healthcare providers, they think that if you're Chinese, your high potassium is naturally from your high potassium intake because we eat a lot of leafy greens and we eat vegetables cooked. And sometimes people do have high potassium and they might need to limit a little bit of their potassium intake. But we all know that there are other causes beyond food that can impact
Mhm.
your potassium. So we want to be able to not be assumptuous and just target the root cause first before blaming food in one's culture.
Yes,
Yeah,
exactly. And especially when they jump to the fruits and vegetables, like we're doing
yeah,
more harm than good, telling them
exactly.
to stop eating or
Yeah,
even understand maybe there's a need to cut back a little, but to completely eliminate all
right.
these fruits and vegetables, like that's gonna lead to other issues. And like you said,
Exactly.
There's
Mhm.
so many other causes for that high potassium. You actually had a really great post recently that came across my Instagram, and it was like the foods that you need to avoid with
Yeah.
CKD. And then it was like, just kidding, don't follow these lists.
Yeah, yeah. And I just hope that like that message can finally get to some of the healthcare providers out there as
Yes.
well.
It's
Yeah,
hard,
pretty
and
hard.
especially because they push back a lot on when I try to say, actually, they're constipated, or actually, and they're like, no, we need to tell the patients that these foods are toxic. And I'm like, but these foods are not toxic.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. You definitely don't want to not eat vegetables because that's gonna make you constipated and then your potassium can go high.
yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. So,
yeah.
great point. I definitely struggle with that in my own clinics as well as trying to get the team to understand that it's probably not the fruits and vegetables.
It's 80%, 90% of the times, not the fruits and vegetables. Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah.
So, Jing, before I let you go, I would really like to hear if you happen to have any recent examples of a patient of either the Asian culture or different culture that you were able to help use their cultural foods to help meet their health goals.
Yeah, I think this is pretty similar to the potassium example that I gave earlier about how people think that when you have high potassium and you're Chinese, it's definitely because you're eating too much cooked leafy greens. So I help like a client of mine who is Chinese. She did struggle with high potassium levels, and her doctor just basically told her to eliminate all the leafy greens from her diet, like bok choy, right? Like the Chinese broccoli, like all those kind of things, like shiitake mushrooms. But even if like she cut out those foods completely and she was basically just eating like a protein and a starch and like just very minimal vegetables, her
Yeah.
potassium is just not going down. But when she and I work together, I help her identify the root causes of her high potassium levels. And like for her, it's because of her acidosis. So with her acidosis, it's actually more beneficial for her to eat more like alkaline forming foods, such as like the fruits and vegetables that she was normally eating. And what we did was we adjusted her like animal protein intake and help her incorporate more plant-based protein like tofu, like beans, and also increase her leafy greens intake. So she was actually eating more potassium from her plant foods. But at the same time, she was able to lower her blood potassium levels because like she was eating more alkaline forming foods.
That's wonderful. That's a great example. I would have taken that lab result and gone to a nephrologist and been like,
Yeah.
that's amazing that you're able to find the root cause, help
Yeah.
solve the problem, and actually got her not only to eat her traditional foods, but more. Like you get to eat
More. Yeah.
more, which
Yeah.
the kidney diet can be so restrictive, but that's because we're blaming the wrong things for these
Exactly.
outstanding labs. So thank you for sharing that with us.
You're welcome.
Awesome. Any final words of wisdom?
Yeah, so if you are a dietitian and you're talking to a Chinese patient with CKD, I think one thing I want to point out is that we usually eat things in the bowl, not a plate. So maybe instead of using the plate method, that's one of the things that we like to do as a dietitian, right? We go out the plate and then we try to talk about the different food groups. So when you use it like a plate method, especially with the more like elderly population in China, it's not really going to make sense to them. So you can think about converting things into a bowl for them, and that will be very helpful. And then another thing is that just because all the patients are from China doesn't mean that they all have the same food preferences. Depending on which region they're from, they might have very completely different cultural preference. So it's good to just get a good idea about their cooking styles, their typical dietary patterns first, instead of like just giving them like a handout on like the plate or something.
Yes, wonderful. I love that because, and this is something I did a post about is that sometimes one, we don't eat on a plate, and two, we
Right,
don't eat our foods separately. Like we don't eat our
right,
protein separate from our starches, separate from our produce. Like for
right.
things like soups and stir fries in the Mexican culture, like we combine everything together. So that's such
Yeah,
a great
yeah,
final thought for our
yeah,
healthcare providers and dietitians listening out there.
yeah. Same in Chinese dishes. Like we mix a lot of foods together. Sometimes when you're talking about the plate, like people really don't have a good understanding or like a good idea about the portions they use like before they put all the foods together in cooking.
Perfect. It's really awesome that you were able to make that transition from working in dialysis to now doing CKD full time. If people wanted to work with you, what's the best way to find you?
Yeah, the best way to find me is through, they can reach out to me on Instagram. My Instagram handle is kidney.dietitian.jing, or you can also send me an email. My email is jing@nutrixtandconsultants.com. So it's JING@NUTRIXTND consultants.com.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Jing. I think there was a lot of wonderful nuggets of information that you gave us today. So hopefully we can be better about working with our kidney patients, and especially if they're the Chinese population. So we really appreciate you.
Thank you for having me on the podcast.
All right, everyone. Thank you for listening. We'll catch you next time. If you are interested in supporting this podcast, you can buy me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/foodculturecurious. Or as always, you can support by sharing, following, or rating this podcast. Every click from y'all means the world to me. And now for a quick disclaimer. Food Culture Curious is for educational and entertainment purposes only and does not take the place of medical advice from licensed healthcare professionals. If you need to seek medical advice, please speak to your healthcare provider. Thank you for listening.